So if we look at then those two blue quadrants, they represent the strongest alignment, either with financial ability, sustainability, or with impact. So those are kind of the sweet spots. But the clear winner is that green area where we have both sustainability and alignment with our mission, because we don't want to be pulled off our mission chasing revenue. And we also don't want to do something in that orange quadrant, which is have something that's distracting or pulling us away from the core of our programming, the core of our mission. So, so these are kind of bright line areas to make us think, as we're going through factors, what box do I put this in? Where am I? What box am I going to end up with this proposed project? Is this something that looks like we should definitely do it, or definitely go deeper into the planning, because it's high, it scores high on both. The tricky part is the gray areas, those kind of white lines in between the blue boxes, because that's where a lot of things actually end up, where we have to make judgment calls and balance and trade off over these areas. Does this make sense so far about how to read this this kind of a program strategy map? And I think that this is something that can be a very useful tool as you think about program development, to give you the broad conceptual framework. So in the chat, if you can, or if anybody wants to say or do anything, but if you've got particular questions about this as we go on, we can explain this a little more. So now that we've had that, we're going to move to Ama, and she's going to now go into the nuts and bolts now that we have this conceptual framework.
Right. So we're going to, as we move along, we're going to take some components of program development, and we're going to sort of like place them in these boxes. What we'll do is you will use the boxes to look at it and say, hey, do we have what we need in this, for this program? Do we have? But as you see, as we move forward, you'll see how that makes sense, how you can use that very, very effectively. So how do we develop a nonprofit program plan, right? Oftentimes organizations leap into programs and activities without developing a roadmap before they get started. I have done that. I have actually had that happen, and then all of a sudden in the middle of it, find out, oh my gosh, we don't have everything we need, or we didn't know it was going to cost this much money, or maybe we have the wrong partners, or maybe it's not quite the right strategy because we didn't include the people in that we were supposed to when we were developing the program. Okay, so what are we talking about today in terms of developing a program plan? We're really talking about building like a mini business proposal, a mini business plan, okay? So it says treat the individual program almost like a mini business. So you go about developing a business plan for this mini business. This will help with grant writing as well as program development and refinement, because this business plan, it really is what you're going to do with the program. This is something that you would give to a funder. And believe it or not, nowadays, funders are calling proposals business plans. So you might as well think of it that way. And it's something that you can always go back to if you need to improve or refine your program, because there's evaluation embedded in this. Okay, as we go along, you'll see that as well. And again, be sure to include staff in the development of the plan, not only staff, but the constituents that you are probably going to be offering the product or the service to, okay? And you share the final document with them, when we say them, we're talking about your staff, so that they can be a part of the executing of a successful program plan. If you share it with them ahead of time, any questions that they have in the executing of it will already be taken care of before the implementation. They will have a clear understanding. After all, they're the ones that are going to need to implement it, so they should have it. That would be best practice, okay? So, what are the elements that go into building a business plan, a program business plan? Well, you want to define your program. right? What is the program going to be? You want to do a market analysis around. I'm going to run through these really quickly because we're going to break it down in detail after these slides. So you want to look at a market analysis. Think, is this something that a service that needs to be met? You're thinking about those things. Staffing and management. Do you have the right staff? Do you have to hire staff? You have timeframes and benchmarks. How long is it going to take us to do this? Okay. You also have your financial requirements. What is our budget? Do we know how much it's going to cost? Revenue projections. How much is it going to cost over time? Can we build up to our most major impact for the program? How long is that going to take? And do we have the revenue to do that? And then marketing plans. How are we going to get it out there? And then we're going to analyze risk. That's the number one thing, analyzing risk before you do anything to see, is this something that's viable? Okay. And how do you analyze risk? Well, there's many ways that you can analyze risk. And part of analyzing risk is defining the program. So if you identify the program and the activities and the impact, how can you do that? You can do that through these first 3 bullet points. And I'm sure if you can give me a show of hands in the chat, how many people are familiar with analysis and how many people are not? Just yes or no in the chat, very helpful, because then it'll determine how deep I go into that. But I believe we've spoken about SWOT analysis in previous trainings with most of you. But just to give the acronym, the SWOT analysis is you're testing the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that are associated with this program that you want to develop. The template is very, very simple. You're just going to sit with your staff, hopefully your program staff. Sometimes we talk about these things in the leadership level, and then we don't sort of bring it down to the program staff level. But they're the ones that are really going to be able to tell you the nitty gritty of what are really the weaknesses of the program as it stands, or as something that you actually want to expand and develop. What are the opportunities from developing this program? What are the threats? Who are the competitors? What are some of the pitfalls? Some of the threats might be you don't have enough money, or you don't have enough staff, or you don't have the proper facility. So in thinking about the development of your program, you need to think about those things, because maybe that goes into the funding when you're asking for funding. We need a new facility to carry out the programming that we want to carry out. Okay. Logic models do the exact same thing. Okay. They talk about the inputs and the outputs. Who are you working with? What do you do with them? What is the outcomes? What are the objectives? What is the impact that you want to make? Who are the players? Who are your stakeholders? So I'm sure most of us, if you've ever had to do a proposal, you've probably had to submit a logic model with that. Okay. We're going to be making templates available to you so that you can use those next week when we do our lab, where we're going to actually be taking on some of your programs and going through this process. So, and we'll be using those templates. So we're going to put that in the chat for you during the break. And then there's something called a logical framework. And I'm very, very interested to know how many of you have ever done a logical framework. You could put yes or no in the chat. Because a logical framework is really an expanded, it's really a SWOT analysis and a logic model all in one. And it really takes your program to the granular level in its plan. And it also takes into effect the threats, the opportunities, the weaknesses, the strengths of your program. But it really it really brings it down to the granular level. And that's one of those, I always say that organizations should take the time, if nothing else, to do a logic model, a logical framework for the organization as a whole, but try to do it for your program areas as well. And you won't find it as hard because your program areas are going to be a lot smaller than when you're putting information in for your whole organization. Okay, so a logical framework, we're definitely going to show that in the lab as well, but that's something that you can use. Okay. The other thing I have to say is that when you're defining your program, you have to avoid mission creeping. Just because there's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it's something that you should be doing with your organization. If it doesn't align with your mission, remember that the 4 quadrants underneath there, it said mission and impact. If that program does not align squarely with your mission and impact, perhaps you shouldn't be doing it. Or if it doesn't align, maybe you need to be looking at somebody to partner with who can help with that portion of it that sort of falls outside of your mission. But the only way to know this is if you actually sit and look at this and go through this. But if it doesn't fit, what did they say back in the day? I'm going to say, if it doesn't fit, you must have quit. If it doesn't fit, don't go with it, because your organization can fall into a pitfall as a result of that. You can end up losing money as a result of that. Okay, so if it doesn't fit.
And Alma, this is a very critical part of what we're discussing today, because we're all working in the community and you want to be responsive to what you think are emerging needs. And this happens a lot, particularly with like community organizing groups. They go in the community and they're trying to maybe work on particular issues, but then they find before we can even deal with that issue, we maybe have to feed people, or the people need this, or they have these other needs that you aren't necessarily geared up and staffed up to do. It's not where you can say that was originally thought what you were going to be doing. And it might actually strain your resources to try to do something like that, particularly if you did it on your own. So there you might be putting yourself in the mind of who do I collaborate with, or if I'm going to do this as temporarily. But the idea here being is it might be related to your client population's needs, but it's not your bailiwick. So I just wanted to put that in. I think that's a key point on it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you want to define your program impact. Why are you doing the program? What is the outcome? What do you want to have happen as a result of implementing this program? So you have to have a purpose. What's your goal? What are the expected or intended outcomes of this program? You have to define all of that before you implement. And I know it sounds pretty elementary, but you'd be surprised what happens when especially organizations are growing an existing program and they don't go back to that. They just launch into what they think is the next step in the evolution of the program. So you really always want to make sure you go back and you do this assessment before you take that step. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. So then,
oh no. Hello?
No, it looks like she dropped, Phil.
Okay, then I will keep up with where she's doing. So we're on market staffing. Well, let me just, one thing about market analysis, we, in a place like Chicago or in Illinois, where there's a lot of organizations, there might be other organizations that are better suited or better situated to meet this particular new need that you might be trying to cover in a new program, and it might be stretching you. So it's always a good idea to see what other groups are out there doing similar work. Alma, you're back?
I'm back.
All right, so I think we're on 3.
Okay, is it market analysis?
Now we're on staffing and management, I think.
All right, perfect. Let me go on to the next one. So staffing and management, again, when you're thinking about your program, do you have existing staff? Do you have that can handle this program? What is your staffing structure? Will it be able to manage and mitigate this program? What are the roles and responsibilities going to be of the staff? You need to develop job descriptions so that there's a clear understanding from the staff folks of what they need to do in the implementation of this program to make sure they carry it from start to finish. You want to make sure that you define the relevant experience and skills needed for that program. Do you need to hire somebody with a different expertise? And do you have the budget right now for that? Or do you need to include that when you're going for resources and funding for this program? You need to know that ahead of time, because you don't want to know after the fact and you haven't budgeted to either bring in new staff or even staff at a higher salary, because you may need a higher expertise or skill in order to implement the program. So you need to know those things ahead of time. Okay. And you look from within first. Look to see, do you have these people? Because the intellectual knowledge is priceless. So if you have people already in your organization who can carry out that program because they already have that prior knowledge, you always want to look at that from within first to see if you have the folks already on staff. Okay. The next one is timeframes and benchmarks. Okay. You need to develop a structure for performing and evaluating the work of the program. I can't say enough, your evaluation plan development needs to happen within your program development. It doesn't happen after the fact, and it certainly doesn't happen after the program has been implemented and finished. Because if you're going to evaluate the program, you need to know ahead of time what you want to evaluate, what you're trying to find out from the implementation of the program. What are some of the metrics you want to look at? Because some of your evaluation is going to be process and some of it is going to be at the end of your program. So you want to make sure you're capturing and evaluating your program as you go along, and you already know ahead of time what you're doing. And I'm going to say this, when you are submitting a program for funding, most public funding and federal funding, they want to see that ahead of time. They want to make sure that your evaluation plan comes in with your proposal, not after the fact. So it's always good to have that already done. Program timeline, what happens when, who does what? That's also very important.
Okay, I'll just pick up here. Financial requirements, to the extent possible, you want to forecast what's going to be required. You know, often a funding source can make cash flow actually difficult. You know, some government programs, maybe it's a performance-based thing or vouchers where you have to do actual performance or meet benchmarks before you actually get uh, the disbursement of cash from the state. So that can really create um, a cash flow jam in your organization. And some of you have probably experienced this at one type of grant or another, that can actually have a negative effect um, on your bottom line because of the disruption it causes because you weren't geared up. So you got to understand what you need. You need to have to forecast it. You have to think about the cash flow. If it's that type of a program where you're being reimbursed and you have to manage that. You also have to look at revenue projections. Outside of maybe the grant funding you have, are there other funders? Is there other government? Maybe the project itself is revenue generating. There many organizations will start an offshoot that is very beneficial revenue wise to fund the core mission of their organization. And many have done that because as a way of being sustainable in a very competitive environment for funds. So um, the idea of this revenue projection is very critical. And when you're talking about organizations trying to do a spinoff, particularly for revenue, and you don't want to, again, you don't want to have that be the main driver and drift further away from your mission. We got some interesting examples of that. But let's stay down to the marketing plan, which is number 7. Marketing, you have to think about marketing in this sense as the marketing of the new product program that you're developing. The first level of marketing is to the client base that you're trying to attract, or the participants to it. What are going to be your mechanisms for reaching out, and what are going to be the messages in that, and how do you target them? So there's your client, your population, your participant population. Then there's potential funders. Even if you get initial funding, you might need funding to expand or to fill in gaps that are created that you find as you go on. So you have to understand the messages and the way to approach the particular funder, meeting their needs, describing again how this helps them with their mission. So you have to have a plan about how you're either going to convene or how you're going to do one-on-ones with potential funders. You also have to do marketing within your organization to do the process of the program development itself, and to bring everyone on board, your board, your staff, to get their input. I learned many years ago working in nonprofits that, the executives and the directors who are working at a certain level don't know sometimes a lot of the kind of mundane nuts and bolts day-to-day struggles of running their own office and dealing with their own body of participants. So sometimes the folks who deliver the service directly, or doing the kind of administrative things that don't seem connected to strategy, they have a lot of insights into what your clients need, want, desire, and are going to respond to. So marketing in this sense is not just external, it's internal to the organization. There's analysis of risks. With every new venture, you're taking risks, and you have to understand that they exist. So you want to have strategies to mitigate them. So you want to be able to anticipate. There's always unanticipated things, but they're risks. There are risks to bringing in new staff. There's risk to going into an area that maybe has pitfalls to it, and you have to have like ways of mitigating that you think about at the beginning. There's this example here of an organization wanting to work with children and ending up hiring a child predator. So you have to understand that there's going to be blowback around that. You have to be able to come up with procedures around background checks or different things. So you analyze the risk, and you also have an eye out towards doing it. An example I could think about this kind of thing, and the risks are both, can be the bottom line, it can be disruption to the program, and it can also be the external image of the organization in the public, in the press, or whatever, which can have an effect on the bottom line and ultimately the success of the organization. I can think of some nonprofits in Illinois when the new dispensary, cannabis dispensary program was adopted, and it was seen by some nonprofits as a way to maybe get revenue in to this, organization that's serving sometimes people, clients, participants who are caught up in the criminal justice system. So, so it might have seemed logical. Hey, why don't we get involved in this dispensary? Do a dispensary application, get a dispensary. We'll get the revenue in. Maybe there'll be employment opportunities for some of our participants. Maybe it's related to our expungent work or something like that. But then when they analyze the risks, there's all the kind of pitfalls of dealing with the going through this application. Maybe that might seem to donors to not be very mission aligned, only tangential to your mission. So there could be blowback around that. When you're dealing with a new area, there could be state penalties, there's tax issues, there's all kinds of things that emerged as people go deeper into understanding that. But ultimately, you're not organized and your mission isn't to have a dispensary. It is to have something to help you do your work, and you saw an opportunity. So you really have to analyze those risks. Again, that's where that grid comes up, the program strategy map, where you're taking these factors and putting them in each one of those quadrants. Are there any questions about any of that?
Sorry, Phil. I think there's a couple people in the waiting room, if you're able to let them in.
All right. Now, it seems like you're better with this than me. When I'm on my share screen, I don't seem to be able to let anybody in. So can I get out of my share screen temporarily and let them in?
Yeah, I don't have co-host ability, so I can't see folks.
Yeah, my co-host is having a problem. So
yeah,
I'm going to temporarily
okay.
do this. I'm going to let them in. I'm going to admit everybody. All right. And Alma's coming back on. So she's one of the people I'm admitting.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. And then we will go back to screen sharing. And I will play the video where we are. All right. So are we back? You can see the screen?
Yeah, it looks great.
Do we have Alma?
I'm here.
All right. So we are on this slide.
Did we go back to the beginning?
On number 12 here, let me see. No, this is where you go into detail.
Oh, I thought that you had probably moved on. Sorry about that.
I did. I was down to number 8, analysis of risk. We did that. And now we're here.
Okay. So I think we were getting ready to move on from there. I was in timeframes and work plans. So let me go back. If you can go down.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also do some of that on number 15.
Right. Can you go to the advance the slides for me, please? One more. And one more. There we go. Timeframes and benchmarks. There we were. We were talking about the evaluation plan and making sure that you embed your evaluation plan within your program development plan so that you have that with you, because funders are going to ask for that. And it is a good guide in terms of how you're going to evaluate your program, what metrics you're going to be using, and at what points in time during the program implementation that you will be garnering some of these metrics. So you want to know that ahead of time. You don't want to wait until the end of the program and then find out you've missed out on some things. So you won't be able to evaluate your program as fully as you would like to. Your program timelines and your work plans go hand in hand. So you know your program timeline, what's going to happen and when is it going to happen? And then the work plan is who is going to do it and by when is it going to get done? And, so that's what the benchmarks are for. And then you also, during this time, you're going to be also zeroing in on your goals, objectives, and outcomes. You want to make sure you understand that these are the things that you're looking for. These are the intended outcomes that you're looking for. You want to make sure that you have points in your program where you're looking to see, are you on track with the identified or intended outcomes that you have? Do you have to add some objectives to the program now that you didn't think about before? Remember, we were talking about how there may be something that's a part of your program that maybe is a little outside of your mission, but is part of the implementation of the program through partnership or something like that. Maybe you have to feed the folks before you do organizing with them. So one of the objectives is to make sure that families get meals on a regular basis. So you have to go back in and put that in your plan. You got to make sure that that's identified in there. Okay. We can go on to the next slide. I believe the next slide was the break, correct?
Right. So let's just check temperature here. If there are some questions about what we've covered so far, maybe you could put them in the chat, or someone could just, we can unmute you if you put your hand up.
And of course, a lot of this is intuitive. You already do this, but you might want to, maybe you weren't so intentional before, but now you have some tools and then some things that you can use to make sure that you dot every I and cross every T as best you can with your program development. But a lot of it is very intuitive.
It's intuitive, particularly at this conceptual level that we're talking about. But as you work through the particulars that Amma talked about, you could then take your program strategy map and you're kind of placing those things on their accesses and making a judgment about it. It might not be like some things can't be quantitatively expressed. It's qualitatively expressed. So it could be a plus or a minus when you take that element. But that's the kind of thing that makes you figure out, hey, is this going to be a potential distraction? When we go back to that original box, let me go up to that quickly.
Here we go.
Where we're trying to stay away from is potential distraction, and so we take the elements and flesh them out as Amma was describing them, and they lead us to some kind of score, either on the financial stability side and the alignment of goals side. And so it's always part of our calculus as to what we're trying to do with this thing. So do people need a short break in 10 minutes to check in and we could come back in 10 minutes? Or do you want to keep going? So let's resume.
All right. So just before the break, I saw Nebula, you made a great point here, where he said, I see this as being a helpful tool when having a disagreement with a major stakeholder like a board, i.e. showing that a program.
Let's quickly then.
Yeah, we can hear you, Amma.
This is a bit of a review, again,
okay,
in terms of that mapping, and we're going to do an exercise with that very shortly. So one of the things that is important to understand about the financial part of that grid, and is figuring out, lining those up, is a thing we like to call ratio analysis. And I want to get right to that, because what that allows, again, these are generally used when you're looking at the whole organization and trying to understand what these ratios are to see if they're healthy. But they're also important for program development and understanding that. So let's start with what's called administrative expense ratio, which is very intuitive. It's saying how much of the organization's expenses, so this project expense, then how much of this project for this new program that we're talking about, how much of that budget goes to administration? That means not necessarily the program meat of it, the service delivery, but the infrastructure. Now, generally speaking, funders want to keep that low. Foundation funders, an administrative expense ratio of a 15% is kind of the high, the threshold. For a lot of government programs, it's as low as 5%, where that's the threshold of how much administration should take from the overall budget of this new project. The reason it's important to think about that is because funders don't want to fund the extant administration. They want to fund that, especially if it's around a particular project or program. They want to know that their money is mostly going to that, and that this is a efficiently run organization or operation. So that administrative expense is something to consider when you're thinking about putting your program budget together, that you do not go over those threshold amounts.
Can I add
Both
here?
for funders and external audiences, but the internal integrity and health of the program. You gonna say
Philip,
something,
can you
Alma?
hear me? Yes.
You're
So
muted.
No, we can hear her. Phil, can you hear us?
I don't think he can hear us.
You're muted.
No. All right. Well, why don't you just keep going? What I'm going to say here, you guys, is that
I still
good
can't hear you.
example, it's okay. A good example of this is that in some instances, you're going to have a funder that's not even going to want to pay for administrative expenses. It could be zero. So you want to make sure that if you're going to implement a plan where maybe your administrative expenses for that program may be 25%, but your funder is only going to give you up to 5%, where you're going to make up that other 20%. So it's not that you shouldn't do the program, but you have to do that with that in mind, that we have to make up that administrative gap somewhere, or it's going to pull and drain on the program and become what? A distraction. A perfect example is After School Matters. I love After School Matters and what it does, but After School Matters pays zero administrative costs. So if an organization is not ready or in a place where they can bear the administrative costs, that's going to be a burden on them. So maybe that's not funding, and maybe a program that. So that's a good example of that. I hope he can see me. I'm just going to get my thumbs up. Philip?
I can't hear Alma. Hello?
Hey, can you hear me, Phil?
FYI,
Can
I
everyone
can
hear me?
Philip. I can hear Philip and Jane. I could hear Alma before, but I no longer can.
Okay, thank you, Trisha. Let me see if I can get Phil.
So you
Here.
can hear me now? Okay, good.
Fine.
All right.
Philip, can you?
I can hear you now.
Perfect. You can carry on. We're done.
Okay. So, are there any questions so far? I want to get a little bit more interaction before we go to these. Okay. Let me just go to the program expense ratio. The program expense ratio is almost the inverse of that administrative expense ratio. This is the money that's explicitly for the program. And so um, that threshold is somewhere they're expecting around 85% if you're talking about a foundation, and about 95% if it's the government funding that we were talking about. So you a lot of times in the guidelines or whatever you're writing or shooting after, it'll be explicit about what those limits are. But as a rule of thumb, program expense is where most of the revenue and where most of the expenditures should be concentrated. So that's simply the program services over the entire expense budget, which gives you that ratio. Then the government reliance ratio is very important in this day and time when we have really tough government funding, a lot of fiscal challenges with governmental entities. So that is simply that ratio of what your overall budget is in this project and how much comes from government grants. And as we talked about, that could have cash flow implications that are negative. It may bring about an understanding that you need supplemental funds, either from reserve from your organization, either reserves, or you need to create another kind of line of spending so that you are not dependent on government funding for programs, overly dependent, because we know that it can be fickle and it can go down with whatever's going on in the economy or whatever going on in politics. And so if it's the sustainability of the program, if it's something that is really tightly aligned to your mission, it's something that you want to continue. And you want to continue whether or not your present funding stays the same or is reduced. So you really want to watch that governmental reliance ratio, both for your organization overall or from the particular program you're talking about, because we've all in this sector know that sometimes that can mean you have to drop a whole program because the government funding stopped or was altered or reduced. And now this thing that your client population thinks and likes and has come to depend on, or your board likes or whatever, is now something you can't do. So you don't want to be over reliant on that. So any questions so far? I'd like you to. So we talked a little bit on the break about examples of how you can use the stroke program strategy map, particularly around the revenue thing, and organizations that started projects really around the revenue generation and some relation to their mission. So there was a good one you brought up yesterday, Alma. What was that one?
The example that I used yesterday was that YMCA of Metropolitan Chicago. They were looking at ways to do more income generation. Now they already do income generation. They have membership and programs or classes and things of that nature. But those were just going pretty much to the existing organizations. And they were like, we need to do additional programming. Where are we going to get this funding from? And so they decided to do it through income generation, and they opened up a Ben & Jerry's. And they had that Ben & Jerry's for a while until two things, I think, that came up with that is that Ben & Jerry's closed. They started closing their stores, right? But even before that, they found that they didn't get as much income during the winter as they did during the summer and spring months. So even though it was bringing in income and it was helping them, in the long run, it was something that they had to phase out. So it was a little outside of their mission, but it was something that was income generating to help feed their mission and help them to do some things further along. So that's a way in which, that's a good example of an organization that is sort of stepping outside of its boundaries to do some things to help grow things from within. Okay.
Let's that's very interesting, Amma. So let's look at that and try to kind of maybe reverse engineer what the YMCA did when thinking about that. Okay, so Ben and Jerry's probably presented the opportunity because at one time their foundation was very active.
Yes.
So they presented this opportunity to contribute to the revenue of this organization that is working with this client population, right? So they were probably very interested initially in this revenue contribution because, wow, we got a big corporate partner. It's a product people like. That probably looked really good. When they look at alignment for goals for impact, so when you're thinking about that, YMCA has a child human development and that sort of thing. So you could construe that as being aligned. The thing is, how well aligned? I mean, we're selling ice cream. That's not what we do. We're not an ice cream thing. Will this distract us? That's probably what they think. Some probably on the board were saying, we don't do this. That's its business and and this could distract us from what we really do, what the WISE programs really are. And we need more money for that. So there might have been pushback around that. But the revenue thing was so high, and then say maybe this mission alignment is not so clearly a distraction. It may be on the other side from distraction into kind of mission related. It's more than halfway. So then that puts you kind of squarely in something that you should do. Could be a clear winner from that standpoint. Now you fast forward to what Amma was talking about years later. Maybe we have a better understanding at that point that the revenue contribution is good part of the year. When, oddly enough, in December and January and February in Chicago, people don't want to buy our ice cream. So does that cause then disruption? We've geared up, a part of our operation to run this thing, and then that business ain't gonna do well, 6 months out of the year in Chicago. So maybe then that changes our idea about what the revenue contribution could be. After we've got to see it a few years, now we understand what it really is. And we might have discovered other kind of distractions that really, where we've got staff meetings, resources going to the store, the ice cream store, that maybe are kind of shifting the focus away from the bread and butter of what the Y did. So that calculus now is pulling this out of a clear winner into something that's more of a distraction. That could be subsequently what you think down the line and why you would think, well, maybe we need to phase this out, which eventually happened. So I hope everyone got what we're trying to get there with that, talking through that. And what we'd like to do now is have everyone do an activity based on that. Amma, could you go through the activity, describe the activity?
Sure. So we're going to do a program strategy mapping, the exact same thing we just did. And you're going to identify and apply either an existing or a prospective program that your organization is planning to implement. And you're going to evaluate against that, the 4 quadrants of that map. and how does that program align? And it, like I said, it could be existing or it could be something that you are thinking about doing. There was an organization that did it and saw that, oh, while they knew that they had issues with the program, their issue was with the way a constituent was going to interface with their actual product. And they found that they didn't speak to the folks first. So the way they thought that the product should be implemented was not the way the recipients needed the product to be implemented. So in looking at those 4 quadrants and looking at those components that we spoke about, those 8 components, they saw that, oh, we did not query our participants and stakeholders in this. So we came with something that we wanted to do, but we didn't talk to them about how implemented or if it's actually what they need, if that's the way in which they need to receive it. So now they're going back to now they said the drawing board, but now they're talking to their stakeholders and their participants about how can we adjust what we're doing so that we make the impact, the expected and intended impact that we want. So this is a way that when you go back and you look at those bullet points, you can say, that's where we went awry. And that's why our program now is having all these distractions. Or it could be the flip of that. You can go through it and see how your program is a clear winner, looking at all those bullet points. Okay, does that make sense? So what we're going to do is break you up into 8 groups of 5, I believe. And
All right. So welcome back, everyone.
sure. Okay. So what we just want you guys to do is just report back. One person to report back on one program that you heard in your group that you can talk about and see, tell us, is it a clear winner? Or is it a program that maybe hit a snag in some areas that made it come down on the scale in the distraction box? So tell us, what did you talk about, and what did you glean from the conversation? So I guess we can go with group 1 first. And group 1. Emma?
Group 6, I thought, but I'm happy to report right now.
Go ahead.
Okay. That's
Okay,
fine.
yeah. So I was talking with Maciel and Aida, and I was sharing, so I work at the National Immigrant Justice Center, and we have been having a lot of conversations recently about funding legal services for Afghan evacuees that are resettled in Illinois. And that's something that we've already started that program, and we're already providing those services to a lot of Afghan nationals that are resettled here. But we're looking for more funding and trying to build that program out more. So we had a conversation about that, and kind of, I think where I was at is that it's definitely aligned with our mission, but it's not a huge revenue builder. But I feel like we don't have a ton of programs that are big revenue builders. But I think this one specifically, all of the funding that we've gotten so far is like specifically earmarked just to provide legal services to Afghan nationals. So it's, not like if we have extra money left over, we can't like roll that over to serve our like general asylum seekers or our detention project or, just like general legal services. So that was just something to think about, but it's something we are pursuing. And yeah, we had a really good conversation about that. And I think Maciel brought up a really good point of maybe there could be we could have a longer conversation about like, okay, like retroactively looking back at programs and saying like, was this a good idea or was it not? And should we like scale this up and continue it? Or should we, end it and say like, that wasn't, the best idea. We should just move on.
That is absolutely right. The matrix is really for existing and would-be programs. And I just want to, highlight the fact that when we talk about, the resource generation, it doesn't even have to just be income generation, like, oh, we have a business over here and now we have this money that's coming in. it really is resource generation. So do you have enough funding? Do you have the appropriate funders? Do you know who you will be? Yeah, so it's even that too. And it sounds like you guys have those things in place. So it doesn't sound like there's too many distractions in that area, other than maybe the fact that, was it a quick program that you had to put in place, or did you already have a structure for that? So that would be the only, was, because that was a fairly quick thing that an organization like you would have to absorb the programming, and the people were already here. So you had to figure out what you were going to do. So that's one of those. Yeah. So that's excellent. Thank you. That was group number 6. Go backwards. Group number 5. Anyone in group number 5?
I don't know what group we were in, to be honest.
Don't even worry, just share. I just want people to share what they got out of that thing. So don't worry about that. Just
I was in group number 2. I can go if.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we actually focused on something a little slightly different. We did talk about the map and the structure, but we focused a little bit on the challenge, the part where you talked about sometimes the source of funding wants you to utilize the funds for specific or in specific areas. Let's say they want that to be applied to the specific mission, and only a specific or smaller percentage to be applied towards administrative costs. And we talked about how that is, at least for, say, my agency, and I did hear a couple examples as well, how that is being a challenge currently, just because at the end of the day, you need the administrative support. You need the people behind the scenes doing the work to be well compensated, to make sure that they are getting an adequate pay, because these days is with the current pandemic crisis that we're going through, it is being extremely difficult to hire people, to retain individuals. And yes, the mission is very important and everything. However, we talked about how there would have to be at some point conversations about the structuring maybe being adjusted or changing a little bit, so that we can take into consideration that one of the biggest components or parts in order for a program, an agency to function, is administrative, is the people doing the work. So we talked about that a little bit.
That was great. And if there's somebody else wants to share, please chime in. I think those are great insights. And as people think, because we have a lot of folks, if you just want to type in just whatever insights you had in the chat, if you don't feel like sharing verbally, but that would help us understand something. So at least that first question of what did you kind of get out of that and insights you had. So does anyone want to share from their session?
Sure, I can go. So my group, I don't remember what number we were, but we, it was Hana Center and Northwest Center, Chicago Teen Reach, and Indo-American Center. And we talked a bit about just needing to have enough staff to cover all the different kinds of cases. 2 of the groups do immigration legal cases, and then there's also youth work. And so we talked about how it's just been difficult to meet the need with our different communities, to make sure that there's sufficient staff. I mentioned in our organization, there's a lot of languages spoken by staff here that aren't offered at other agencies. So it can also be difficult sometimes if we don't provide a service to then, to make sure that we're meeting the goal of serving the community, it can be hard to refer them to other folks, because there aren't that many folks that speak Hindi or do, these specific languages from our agency. So those are some things that we talked about.
Is your car?
That's really
Tell
interesting.
him,
That's really interesting.
send him up. It's fine. Yeah. Or I'll come down. Yeah, there's no more rental assistance. There's no rental assistance. He knows that.
Somebody's has their
No,
background.
it's ended. Ended on
Chirag.
Sunday. Yeah, but if you want to have him send them, I can talk to the client. Yeah, it's fine.
So we were getting some program strategy in real time there. So that was exciting. So if someone else, I thought those were great comments. And I'm sure people are seeing, as they're hearing these, themselves, their organization, their situation, similar things they can relate to. Somebody else want to share? Okay, so we're coming up close to the end of the session. A lot of time that we had for it. We want to respect your time. One of the things that we wanted to say here is if your organization, if this is particularly this exercise, we're going to be doing a lab as our next session where we do a deeper dive into these things. And so we wanted to use an organization or organizations as examples that maybe wanted to talk through this program development using different tools that will be shared with you. And so we wanted to see if there was a group that either had an existing program or a new program that they wanted to kind of run through an analysis in a group setting, and that would be the focus of the lab. So if you can in the chat, if you're interested in being part of that, please type in the chat, let us know, give us your email address, and we will get back with you. It won't be onerous. We won't have you, there's not a lot we want you to do, except we're going to frame the session so that everybody can kind of get a sense of how to use this in a very practical way. Does that make sense? Before you leave, please follow this, the Survey Monkey at link that's at the top of this chat section. And it's the same link that you're seeing there. And that'll help us. That's an evaluation of the session. It'll help us calibrate the kind of things we need to do for future sessions. And just please be nice about the technology.
So sorry about that. But thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
And so thank you very much. And I hope that you got as much out of it as we do. We learn every time we do this. We really do. Your examples are really helpful and will help the next people that are trained with this information. So thank you. So I see people are leaving. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up now. And again, thank you very much.